There we go. There's one. Hit it on the pause. Another decent one. Not huge, but biggest ones that we've been seeing so far today. And I just have the boat spot locked. I'm literally not moving since that last fish there. And that's one thing that I love about when fish go out deep this time of year. You can just hit spot lock and just keep casting in the same spot. Once you get those schools fired up, you really don't have to move around a whole lot. We're gonna get right back in there while they're still hot. And if you come up and look in the front here, we are sitting right out on the outside. These are all weeds behind us, and then it leads into a nice rock pile. And I am just making casts straight into the wind. And I'm positioned downwind from these fish, which allows me to spot lock and make casts straight ahead. If I was on that side of it and I hit spot lock, the fish would be behind me and I wouldn't be able to see what's out in front of me. I wouldn't be utilizing the 360. So sitting behind these fish and then casting forward into the wind, staying off of them, just so they don't feel the presence of the boat. And I can utilize my electronics to make accurate casts and get the most high percentage areas. Another one on the pause. That's one of the things that I love so much about a crankbait is the way that you can manipulate it. I'll do a straight retrieve for a lot of the cast, but I like manipulating the bait, speeding up, slowing down, killing it, jerking it, that kind of stuff. Just just changing up your cadence. A lot of times will trigger that strike. They see something darting through the water, or they see something die. They might think it's a dying bait fish or whatever. Just changing up your cadence a lot of times will trigger a bite, and the last two fish came on the pause, so that's just something to keep in mind. Just listen to what the fish tell you, and I guess I'll keep throwing that into my cadences. A deep diving crankbait is one of my favorite baits to throw, period, basically, especially when they go out deep. It's so much fun. Number one reason that I like to throw it is because they crack the snot out of it. They hit it so hard. But number two, like I was saying, you can do so many different things with it. You can change up your cadence, speed it up, slow it down, rip it out of weeds, out of rocks. You can do so much with it, and you can cover water. Once the fish go deep, there's a lot of water that they can sit in. And so being able to cover down on a lot of water just to find the fish is really, really helpful, and you can do that with a crankbait. And also, hard baits in general, you're just not messing around with plastics and that kind of stuff. And when you get these schools fired up, like I have, you can get right back in there. You can unhook the bass and get your bait right back in the water. You're not messing around, threading on different plastic or something like that. It's just cast and wind. That's all you're doing. You don't have to really mess around with it a whole lot. So it's just a really, really fun bait to fish with, and it's really efficient when these fish are out deep. So as far as color selection with a crankbait, there's obviously a lot of different colors out there, just like any bait. But for me, I like something a little bit brighter. Today, we're on a lot of bluegills, so I went with a chartreuse, greenback, orange belly. If I'm on a fishery with a lot of shad, a Tennessee River, lake, something like that, I'll go with something that's white. But I just like something that stands out a lot, regardless of where you're fishing. Something that this thing's moving really fast through the water, so I like getting their attention with a bright colored bait. And so obviously this thing doesn't look like a bluegill, but when it's going through the water, it grabs their attention and forces them to react to it. So that's just my personal preference. Sometimes I will try to match the hatch and go with something supernatural, but more times often than not, the first thing I grab is something bright and obnoxious like this one. So there we go. Not a big one. A lot of 2-pounders in this lake. But they all hit this thing the same. Look at that guy. Double hooked. When they're getting the front hook in the mouth, that's when you know they want it. God, such a fun bite. I can't stress enough how important it is to line up your casts. As you can see, what I've been doing is I position the boat right on the edge of this grass line, and I can see the rocks off to my left, and I want to try to get my cast as close to that weed line as possible, just so I'm paralleling it, but ticking the rocks at the same time. There's a lot of these fish, what they're doing is they're sitting their nose right on the edge of the weed line. They're waiting for something to pass through, whether it's a little school of gills or whatever it is. They stay inside that grass line and just poke their heads out waiting for a little meal to come by, such as this little crankbait. So it's really, really important, because if you're a couple feet into the weeds, you're gonna get hung up. If you're a couple feet too far out away from the weeds, they're not going to poke their head out and come grab it. So it's a really specific deal, and using my Mega 360, it makes life really, really easy. I've done this for the past 4 or 5 years. I've really gotten into cranking weed lines, and before I had 360, I would go through and waypoint every little nook and cranny of these weed lines. And you can get away with it, but you're just gonna get hung up a lot, and you're not gonna be in the strike zone as much, you know, out away from the weed lines. So using my Mega 360, I can make sure every single cast is in a high percentage area, which is really, really nice. As far as my deep cranking setup here, it's actually pretty specific. This is a 7/4 medium heavy moderate. So that moderate action gives me a little bit of forgiveness. Treble hook, baits in general have a tendency to rip out of fish's mouths, and so I want a little bit of forgiveness in my rod, just so I'm not ripping hooks. But as you can see, this is not a glass rod. I don't use a glass rod when I'm around weeds, just because it's a little too mushy for me. I want a little bit more of a backbone to be able to rip grass and that kind of stuff. So just a little bit beefier setup, as well as 14-pound fluorocarbon. It's a little bit heavier. Typically, if I'm offshore or a little bit cleaner bottom cranking, I'll go with the 12. But in this case, since we're around a lot of grass, I went with the 14-pound, as well as a little bit higher gear ratio. Typically with crankbait fishing, you want a slower gear ratio, be able to slow that bait down. But in this case, I want to be able to rip grass, and a lot of times they're going to hit it off that initial rip of the grass, and so I want to be able to catch up to them really quick. So a little bit faster gear ratio is getting that done for me. So pretty specific setup, but I feel that it's really important and helps me hook more fish and land more fish. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. What do we have, Nick? What do we have? It's a bass. It's a bass. Same size as the rest, but again, front treble. That is so fun. Seriously, it's so fun. I can cover so much more water than I would be able to with, a jig or a Texas rig, a drop shot, something like that. And, something moving this fast, you might not think it would get bit this time of year. These fish are, I would say, late post spawn now. They're moving out deep. And so you wouldn't always think that a fast moving bait like this would get bit, but it triggers bites. It definitely triggers bites. So it's something that's little bit off the wall. Not everybody's doing it, but it definitely puts fish in the boat, and good ones too.